Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Ambassador Talks. As always, I'm joined with a guest, and this week's guest is Asma Nafees, who's got a long-winded job title, so I'm going to try and get this right. She's the Deputy COO for the NHS. Help me out here.
Commissioning Support Unit.
Commissioning Support Unit. Welcome, Asma. Today, we're going to talk about your job, some of the issues you're facing, and it's a free-flowing conversation. There's no script, as I always say. So introduce yourself. Tell me what you do, and what's the hot potatoes that you're dealing with at the moment.
So I'm Asma Nafees. I'm a Deputy Chief Operating Officer within the NHS, a Commissioning Support Unit. These organisations were set up to provide support into the NHS by the NHS. I'm also a non-executive director on the board of Derbyshire Community Hospital, here where we are in our locality, a trustee for a charity that supports adults with learning disabilities called Lizio Trust, and a local authority, NED, for a social enterprise in Nottingham, which is about keeping young people in education and employment, as well as being a mum of four. I always have to bring that into it. So.
That should be the first one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome, Asma. I mean, we've known each other for a few years because we were both NEDs on that same trust that you've just mentioned. There's in the news at the moment, the NHS is all over the place. There's a lot of discussions and changes and stuff. The public are slightly confused. So what's going on? Can you put it in a nutshell? What's going on? What's the announcements mean to Joe Public at the moment? What does it mean to them?
So for Joe Public on the ground, for people like you and I who need to access services, there will be no change in the short term. So the announcement about the NHS England being abolished, NHS England was a governing body that had oversight of how the NHS were delivering. So your services, being able to access your GP practice, your local hospital, everything will remain as it is. Yeah. Obviously, we've heard in the press over a number of years about the financial sustainability of the NHS, growing waiting lists, partially as a result of COVID. So there's a lot that needs to happen to improve the way that our health sector works and functions and supports its patients. But I think the biggest thing I'd say, and I've had some GP friends say to me that in their practices they've had patients saying, what does this mean? Will we not exist? How do we access healthcare? On the ground, in the short term, there'll be limited change. And then the bigger changes will mean improvements, hopefully in service delivery, improvements in access to hospital appointments, seeing your GPs, etc.
Well, that'd be music to the ears of many people watching this podcast in terms of improvements, because there are delays. There are a lot of, the amount of people I speak to on a daily, weekly basis who say, I can't get to see my GP, or I can't. My operation's been cancelled or delayed, so hopefully those conversations will become something of the past. But the thing is, I mean, one of the things I've sussed out, sussed out is the wrong word. I've realised over the last few years, since we came out of the pandemic more than anything, was that the disabled person, and I always talk on behalf of disabled people, as a disabled person myself, they don't necessarily have the greatest experience in any kind of access to a health service. And something I've always mentioned is that there's a big drive in the NHS to cure sick people who are sick, short to medium term sickness, and whatever it could be. But disabled people normally have a permanent condition, and that's more about managing that impairment, or managing pain relief, or getting pain relief, or managing a condition to the extent that it doesn't worsen. And that's where the challenge I have seen for the NHS, and how they don't always get it right. And I'm not here to bash the NHS, because they do some great work, and long may that continue. But certainly disabled people, and particularly coming out of the pandemic, it came to light that so many disabled people gave some horrifying examples of what had happened to them, how their condition worsened because they were just suddenly went to the bottom of the queue in terms of accessing services. What's been your experiences of working with that cohort of people?
So for me, I'm non-clinical.
Yes. Yeah.
And not within a provider environment. So I'm going to caveat this with these are my opinions based on the experiences of family members, those around me. I think there's a big piece around health inequalities and access to care, which impacts on the disabled community more so than the broader community. So I'd say one of the things that I say to speak about in many forums is be vocal about experiences, including bad experiences. We need to make sure that your voice is at the table to be heard with these commissioners of service, with providers, those who are designing what the service will look like, access to the service. It has to be co-designed. And I know co-designed gets badged up as a bit of a buzzword and engagement with the communities. Co-production, yeah. I think one of the big things is making sure that all voices are represented at the table that is making the decisions, that's designing services, so that we can make those changes. I think for a long time, co-production was tokenistic rather than truly listening to views. And I always encourage people to make sure that they're speaking to their local communities, their providers, getting involved in community engagement exercises to ensure that voices are heard, and then challenge if they haven't been implemented and the needs haven't been met.
I'm so glad you said that, because disabled people have been consulted to death on issues, and not just disabled people, the public in general. And one of the things I spent a lot of my time in, particularly in the early part of my career, was sitting around tables being asked for my opinions by commissioning bodies. And after a while I refused to engage because I thought, I'm just here to rubber stamp. And that wasn't just an opinion I felt, it was many of my peers felt the same as well. And true co-production, true co-design is where, there's an equal partnership in that conversation, and people are being listened to, and there are measured outcomes at the end. And that's where I think we have this little bit level of distrust when it comes to people being asked to get involved in collaborative work and co-production and co-designing of new projects and services. There's another thing in terms of you work in commissioning, which is really good to kind of get your thoughts on this, because historically, I've worked in the voluntary sector, and so my background is voluntary sector. Historically, the NHS isn't very good at commissioning the voluntary sector, and I can say that through experience. And whereas local authorities have had a better run at engaging with and then commissioning services directly from third sector organisations. What do you think the issues are that have been a bit of a barrier for the NHS to involve voluntary sector organisations in this delivery and possibly co-designing services? And so what do you think the challenges have been there for it?
If I think of my time in the NHS, and I used to on the commissioning side, I used to manage one of the big acute hospitals in the West Midlands. Part of the time is that the resource and time is invested on managing the big hospital contracts and negotiating the big hospital contracts. If I think back 10 years, there wasn't the awareness that you'll get more for the public pound with the voluntary sector. I'm more aware of that now. I know with the trust that I work with, they do a lot with the local community and the voluntary sector, because the voluntary sector are able to kind of speak at roots level to the citizens and be able to support that. If I'm honest, I think there was a gap in knowledge and awareness because we were so busy focusing on the bigger area, the acute hospitals and what's being provided there.
I think this, you're probably right to some extent there, but one of the things I also found was there was this almost misunderstanding about what the sector did and what it was capable of. Because there was, I joined the voluntary sector 30 plus years ago, and I remember my old boss said to me, you come to work smart, and I said, why? We're the voluntary sector. He says, because that's exactly why, because people don't take us seriously. They think we should be coming to work in dungarees and sandals because we're that kind of a sector, and we need to show them that we mean business when we're sitting around the table. We are just as knowledgeable and experienced in whatever the subject matter is as the commissioners around that table. And so I took that on board and realised quite swiftly that he was right, that they had this view of us that needed to change, and that we weren't able to deliver because we don't have systems and policies and procedures that, I mean, you know, the NHS is very process driven, yeah. And understandably, but so trying to get commissioning bodies to understand that, you know what, we have policies and procedures as well, but we don't have the red tape that you have, yeah. And so we can deliver services much faster and more efficiently, and you do get, you know, your pounds worth out of us, if not more. So I think there's some work to do there in terms of trying to get commissioning bodies, not just the NHS, but in general. You know, one of the last things I did before I stepped down from this organisation, from Disability Direct, was to get a commercial organisation to come and sponsor a project, mm-hmm. which is unheard of, and that's because they have the same view. Yeah. That, well, you guys operate in a very different way. You're not about us, but.
See, one of my big worries in that space is we're seeing budgets contract right now.
Yeah.
So we're seeing healthcare, social care, broader, and it will impact on the charity sector as well, because more often than not, you're reliant on non-recurrent funding.
Yeah.
But that contraction means that there's more slipping through the cracks in the support that's provided.
Yeah.
And the worry is, even when we look at healthcare, when there's a contraction of services and support or local authority, it will impact on the voluntary sector, and it will impact in a greater way than we recognise, because there's always a ripple effect of any change that happens.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned in your intro that you are part of the third sector organisation as well. I mean, there's probably times when you've sat around that trustee meeting or the board meeting in that organisation and thought, this organisation could probably deliver something that the NHS could do, and probably do it better. But I mean, that must be a bit of a dilemma for you to have both those hats on. To think
I think one of the things that I've really found when looking at the social enterprise and the charity sector is that non-recurrent funding. So year on year, the conversation that you're having and the level of efficiency that you're having to build in, and the forward planning is a lot more, I'd say, than probably in the mainstream NHS.
Yeah.
Because one of the conversations we've had most recently is about, you know, what happens if this funding isn't continued. We're setting our budgets now, but we won't hear back until June. So there's something that in the voluntary sector, you're almost forced to have innovation and efficiency and increase your productivity by virtue of the way that cycle works.
Absolutely.
And I'm really fortunate. So the charity board that I sit in are an amazing cohort of individuals. And one of the things that's a golden thread for them is how can we be constantly improving what we're doing and making it better for our service users.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's reassuring to hear. But let's talk about the other hot topic at the moment is DEI, and I've just come back from the USA 2 days ago and talking to third sector organisations over there, and they are in real panic mode, understandably, because of what's been discussed by the American government at the moment around, you know, slashes to DEI commitments and budgets. I've already seen a ripple effect coming over here. Have you witnessed anything in your area of work in terms of people thinking slightly different around it, or?
I think I haven't seen any direct impact yet, but there's definitely a fear now, because I heard something on the radio the other day that when America has a cold, the UK sneezes, something along. Right?
It's true.
So there's a worry, because when you hear some of that narrative, you know that it's going to impact on where we're at the moment. Thankfully, in the forums that I'm in, the conversation around addressing health inequality, the conversation around inclusion, access, etc., are very much live.
Yeah.
But there is a real fear that if that falls down, you're gonna broaden the gap between your wealthiest cohort of people who have access to everything, and broaden that health inequalities gap.
Yeah, and that, Mike, I just before Christmas, I had a couple of bookings because I do a lot of keynote speeches around DEI, race and disability and that kind of thing. And so I had two very strongly confirmed bookings. About 3-4 weeks after the new American president steps in, one of them cancelled. And I said, what's the reason? Oh, we're just looking at other priorities at the moment. And I thought to myself, is there going to be a pattern emerging here? And strangely enough, since then I've not had any more emails or phone calls about bookings around that subject, because I think I can see people are starting to think slightly differently. And when there's government cuts, no matter what country you're in, when there's government cuts, DEI is normally one of the first that goes off the spreadsheet, off the budget sheet, and that kind of tells me how seriously companies or institutions are taking that subject matter. And so it is slightly worrying, but again, that's where I think the voluntary sector has got a bigger role to play, because we have a little bit more around ethics and morals in terms of making sure we want to reach all communities, not just certain communities. So we want to involve and include all communities in our decision making that others don't. So yeah, that's kind of like I think some space to watch as to what goes on in the next 6 to 12 months as to how that affects the NHS, or how that affects the third sector or even the commercial sector, because it's not just about being inclusive, it's about ensuring that you're creating a better society for patients, consumers, service users, whatever you want to call them, customers even.
And any society is only as good as how much support it provides to its most vulnerable citizens. So the elderly, children, people with disability. There's something ingrained in having integrity as a society means looking after all of us and providing more support where needed rather than less.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, one of the things I also wanted to talk to you about is the challenges that people face when they're climbing the ladder in their career, and whether they have challenges or not. I mean, I certainly did to some extent. And I just wondered your thoughts and your experiences of anything that you could pass on to viewers and listeners as to what they should watch out for and how to overcome, and any of your experiences that may be of interest to them. Anything you'd like to share?
As a visibly Muslim South Asian woman in leadership within the healthcare, across my career journey, I've had challenges, and linked into kind of diversity of heritage is also with working mothers or working parents. Must be more inclusive in my language, and the additional layer that puts in when you're looking at your career journey. So I've got a very unconventional career journey in that I was one of those sad people at the age of 14, knew I wanted to be a solicitor. So I, planned in that way. A-levels, law degree, qualified as a solicitor, thought I had my life mapped out. And then the recession of 2008-9 happened. Newly married, new house, mortgage, car, finance, and then the bottom dropped out of my world, quite literally. It meant that I pivoted into the NHS. And initially, my early years, I always intended to go back to the law. And then I realised that there was a bit of a niche in that contracting, finance, data and analytics. So when I joined the NHS, I was sold a contracting role. But once I started, 90% of the role was analytics, so there was lots of learning on the job. So sadly, give me hospital data and I can decipher and give you lots of amazing statistics and graphs and charts. But what I found within my journey as I've climbed is children and maternity leave becomes a barrier to your progression, because every time you've had time out, you feel like you have to work twice as hard when you go back into the workplace. I've got 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, so that time out meant that whenever I went back into the workplace, I was working at 150%. Trying to prove myself. And now the advice I give to others, and recently there's someone in my organisation who's come back from maternity leave, is allow yourself, pace yourself. You don't have to come back and within the first 6 weeks be at 150%. Pace yourself. Treat it as if you're going into a new organisation because you've had a year's gap. So there's something around the way that we support those returning back into the workplace, as well as kind of the mental barriers that we have about what we now need to prove. And I guess the other bit for me is my career has almost been built on being the hardest working person in the office. And when I talk to South Asian colleagues or people of colour, even broader, that's a real common theme that comes across. So in my day job, I'm at sub C-suite level, and when I was applying for executive roles, one of the bits of feedback would come back is not enough board experience. So I took it upon myself to become a charity trustee, because it filled 2 facets, the board exposure as well as giving something back into the community. And it's supporting adults with learning disabilities, which is an area quite close to my heart. And then I joined the board of Derbyshire Community as a non-executive director. And I really enjoy that. But sometimes people ask me, why do you do so much and how do you manage it all? It started from a necessity, because I wasn't, my career path wasn't paved for me. I didn't have a mentor who was going to help that journey in the way that others might have. So I think there's something about kind of the additional barriers that come into play, and the intersectionality of being parents in the workplace, being of a different heritage, and how all that plays out. So although people jokingly say, how do you find the time? I think someone referred it as elasticity of time. I'd love to just be doing the one job and getting the growth and the fulfillment from the one place. But that didn't happen for me, so I sought it.
You're resonating quite strongly with me on some of the things you've said there, in terms of, when you're you come into an organisation and you're not the mainstream norm of compared to everybody else in the office. You have to work harder, and I'm not just saying that from you and me, our point of view. Everybody who, whether you're a disabled person or you're of South Asian origin or from the black community or whatever, you're constantly finding yourself doing more things than everybody else in the office, because you've got to prove to everyone else that you are just as capable, if not more. And it's kind of frustrating, and it becomes the norm. You and I were talking off camera earlier about me taking a step down now from CEO. I've become more busier because I don't know how to relax anymore. If I'm not doing stuff and I'm not doing more than I should be doing, if I'm not working in overdrive, something's not quite right. And that's come from having to constantly be proving yourself at 150% to those people in sitting in judgment positions, that your cohort that you belong to aren't capable, or you have a certain mindset, or you're a certain traditions that you work by, and you have to constantly be proving everybody wrong, just to kind of stay on an equal playing field.
It's a justification that you've validly got the seat at the table, that you're always having to be on this circle of just justifying that you're entitled to be here, versus some of our peers who might be like, right, I've secured the role, I'm here, I'm delivering this. There's a level of assurance in the way that they might interact. I had a really interesting conversation a few years ago where I was in a quite a diverse team, and one of my managers at the time was talking about a lady who happened to be of African origin, and she said, oh, let's just call her Jane. She's not Jane. Jane's very easy to work with and very amenable. And it got me thinking, when I talk to colleagues, this being easy to work with almost becomes ingrained in you. So then even when you do need to challenge something, you almost second guess about whether to challenge or not, because you're having to be the hardest working person in the office and also amenable and easy to work with. And that adds an additional burden, I think.
It certainly does, and it kind of, makes it difficult. That's an interesting point you raise. It makes it difficult to challenge them when you are they're all right, they get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah, how many times have we heard that? Safe pair of hands, they'll just get on with it.
Yeah, they keep their head down. They're no bother to anybody. They're not the ones that, are always getting disciplined for something or the other. And the reason is because you're terrified to put your head above the radar. Because the minute you do, well, you're like that because you're a certain colour, or you're like that because you're a disabled person. You've got a chip on your shoulder.
Yes.
And that's kind of, it still happens today, which is unfortunate. But yeah, so I mean, we're heading into a conversation around some of the issues that people face when it comes to judging around their ability because of their colour or their disability. There's this term that was started being used about 4 or 5 years ago, which it disappeared off the radar. It's called microaggressions. It was starting to get discussed, and I thought, great, this is the perfect word now to describe what a lot of people are going through. But everybody stopped using it again.
Yeah.
And I find it quite sad. Microaggressions, to anybody who doesn't understand about it, is something around not being overtly, directly racist or homophobic or anything like that. It's more about the subtle kind of language and behaviours that people have around you, that you think there's something else that you're trying to do. What's not being read out loud, or what's written between the lines of what you're saying and doing is just as, if not more, offensive. And so, what's your thoughts on microaggressions?
I think it's a really good point, because almost being called the P word is something you know how to tackle, right? Because somebody said something very offensive and you have a right to be offended and you have a right to challenge back. Microaggressions, you almost get gaslit because you think, have I got a chip on? Did that really happen? Yeah. Have I got a chip on my shoulder? And a lot of the times, I think if we think about racism or discrimination, it's so institutionalized that people don't realize that they're acting in a particular way. So it won't be that I don't like Amo because he's a brown male. It will be, he's just not my type of person. Mm-hmm. But the difficulty is there's a grouping of people and you're treating someone differently. Yeah. By virtue of, and then that plays into the microaggression piece, some of the things that are said or the unsaid. I'll give you a really good example. So my early part of my career, I didn't wear the hijab. I was, lawyer turned NHS. I was in my tailored neck suits and, straightened hair and immaculately turned out. And I started wearing the hijab in about 10 years ago. Yeah. So first meeting, we've got someone from one of the big 4 consultancies, myself, director, we're at a breakout round table. If you're at a round table and 3 of you normally sit in a triangle. Sure. So this individual from consultancy world had assumed that the director at the table was the main person. So he was kind of angled away from me and talking to the director, and had assumed I was there to take the notes maybe, because I was wearing a hijab. 20 minutes in, I know the minute he realised it would be me delivering the work, because there was this subtle kind of like switch over in body language. And those things you don't realise. I noticed it at the time, and I noticed the switch, and it still stays with me. So I don't think that a lot of people in the workplace are overtly thinking, have overt racism or overtly thinking about it. But there's things that happen. People make assumptions based on the way that you look. A bit like the conversation earlier about the charity sector and whether you wear a suit or whether you wear more casual clothing. People make assumptions based on what they see, and that impacts on the way that they interact with you.
Assumptions are the most dangerous thing that you could get in any environment, because it builds walls and barriers. Yeah. And pigeonholes people in communities, and that really kind of is quite dangerous when we're trying to integrate with each other, not just one community integrating into the wider community. It's all communities integrating into each other, and that's kind of I just went to last night, and then the week before I went to 2 iftari events, and it wasn't just a room full of Muslim people; it was a room full of all communities. Yeah. And I thought, isn't this great? Isn't this I'm learning more about the Muslim community locally in my neighbourhoods and the city, and vice versa. They're just by talking to me, they're understanding more about me, and we need more of that to happen. From all communities, spending time with each other. My first job was for an organisation called the Open Centre when I left school and college, and it was about going into schools and teaching children about all communities, and that was a funded post.
Yeah.
That post won't exist anymore because it's not seen back to DAI. It's not the community cohesion isn't a priority anymore. Until something really bad happens, then the government throws money at community cohesion, trying to get community to mix together. It should be a constant thing that we're encouraged to live with each other in a much more harmonious way.
Yeah, we so there's a big digital conference that happened at the NEC last week called Rewired. It brings together NHS leaders and the digital sector, and we hosted an iftar there, and it was 50% people of colour, 50% non-BAME people, and also a mixture of Muslim and non-Muslim. And it was really nice to just break bread together because you kind of find there's more commonality than not. But your point around community cohesion and that needing to be happening throughout the year, so the riots that we had last summer, they kind of almost prove that needs to be happening all year round. Because what was shocking for me at that point was just how quickly the tide changed. Suddenly, having never felt unsafe in my local area, I regularly kind of go for walks. I was considering whether, as a Muslim woman who's wearing a hijab, I was safe going out my front door and going for a walk on the usual route that I've done for the last 10 years. And I think that really put the fear in me, and it plays into that point about this work around community cohesion needs to be happening all year round, not just when pockets of things are happening.
And that's a big worry, and certainly that I would notice the last 10 years since we've come out of the dreaded Brexit vote. In the last 10 years we've seen a shift, a real measured shift in how people behave when it comes to community cohesion and the priorities, because I've always had this thing about the silent majority. The silent majority do get on with each other. The silent majority do want to get on with each other as well. Unfortunately, it's the handful of loud people who are very vocal in the media, very vocal on social media. They're the ones that seem to be driving the conversation, and that's quite a scary position to be in, where we're in the hands of these people who are not necessarily representing our views. But anyway, what's the future hold for you, and some of the things that you want to encourage the next generation of people coming through in your line of work?
So I recognise the extremely privileged position that I now sit in. So having been through kind of the battle of the career journey, and so I try to use all of those facets to help support. I recently founded a network called the She Women's Network, which is about supporting women in cross-sector careers and creating that pipeline for new generations. So one of the pieces that I'm working on at the moment is about creating resources that help the younger cohort, particularly those from a diverse community, but not exclusively, to access more careers. So when I was younger, and I don't know whether you had something similar in your family, the career options available to us were lawyer, doctor, accountant, the periphery of your vision. The NHS in itself has got over 320 distinct roles, which I didn't know anything about. So there's something about how do we support and encourage our youngsters and our communities to access more careers, to help open doors, to help social mobility, because education is a thing that unlocks discrimination, unlocks, all of the isms that exist. Education is the one thing that counters it. So that's one of the things that I'm really vocal about, and that social mobility piece is really important to me, and the reality is a bigger cohort of those within the lower earning bracket tend to be people of colour or communities, BAME communities, really.
I think one of the things that I think you've touched on there to some extent is, you're in a leadership role now, which is really important. People see, the next generation needs to see people who look like them in a leadership role, that it can be done, and it's done effectively. I, at the moment, I'm mentoring, I think, last count, I think it was about 7. I've got about 7 people from the younger generation, people in their 20s and 30s, who I'm mentoring them into, and it's, in all honesty, it's not even mentoring, they're just having conversations with me and bouncing off of me more than any, bouncing ideas and thoughts off of me more than anything, but they like to call it mentoring. And one of the things they say is, well, we want to be like you. We want to sit there in 20 years' time and enjoy the position you've had. And I try and explain, it's been hard work, but it's good that they can see that there's somebody, whether they are disabled or whether they are of South Asian origin or male or female, or it doesn't make any difference. It's just that they want to know that somebody who's been through disadvantage gets to that senior position, and that there's hope for them. I get a lot of parents of disabled children say, okay, our child was diagnosed 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, but seeing people like you in those positions gives us hope, and that's something I think is really important. So I think it's important that you are out there and making the noises that you're making, because that gives hope for future generations, that you know, they don't have to be just doctors and lawyers and stuff. And one of the things I'm really keen on is irrelevant of what your background are, children should be encouraged to be and do what they want to do.
Yeah, what they enjoy.
Rather than to go for the safe jobs. Because, you know, people, when they are allowed to express themselves creatively in their own space, they achieve the outcomes are phenomenal. And we need to encourage that rather than say, well, okay, you've got to be married and have 2.2 children and have a mortgage and a safe job in an office environment. That's not necessarily for everyone.
Yeah, and I had a few years ago, I had a colleague at work ask me what I'd like for my children. So we've got a doctor. My sister's a doctor, my brother's an accountant, one's a teacher. You know, what would I like for my children? Would I want them to go down the doctor or lawyer route? And I said, probably not. Yeah. What I'd want for them is to be happy in what they're doing, have enough so that they're able to put a roof over their head and feed themselves. But there's more to life than just being on this kind of hamster wheel of career driven, or deciding that a particular profession has hierarchy over another. I think, and the world's moved a little bit. We're a bit more woke about do what makes you happy.
I hope it has moved, because it's just, you just see a lot, you know, that parents can put pressure on their children to be a certain way, and be almost a mirror image of what they went through. And I would hope, you know, I mean, my children said flat out to me, we don't want to do what you've done, which is fine, because they also saw that I had no life while I was doing it. I was working flat out. So it totally understandable. But it's I think it's important that we allow children to express themselves and be what they want to be.
Yeah, and particularly with our communities, we don't encourage the arts, and we don't encourage writing, or we don't encourage sports, or there's, you know, apart from boxing and cricket, which is now predominant, we don't encourage that. And there's a whole softer side of life, a whole nice side. So I think you're right. It should be about the vocation and what the individual enjoys, and guide them towards that way. My daughter, who's 12, she's like, I'm deciding, Mum, whether I want to be a lawyer like you were, or whether I'd like to open a cake shop and have a tea shop. And I'm like, either's fine.
Cake shop?
Either's fine, yeah.
I would strongly encourage more cake shops. You can't get enough cake shops on this high street. But look, Asma, you probably won't believe this, we've come up to our half an hour. Is there any final thoughts you want to say to anybody, or a message to viewers and listeners?
I think I'd like to thank you for starting this Ambassador Talks movement and inviting me here. I think the advice that I'd give to people on their career journey is be brave, be vocal about what you're doing. So I think one of the biggest barriers that I've overcame was, within the South Asian community, there's this piece about being humble and not bragging too much about what you're doing, but be vocal about your successes, because that will help with your development. And call on mentors. You know, you're describing how you mentor individuals, talk to people and learn from those who have walked the path before you. And I know we've talked a lot about kind of positive and negative, but the future is bright. The future's bright, and we can all be part of that change.
Absolutely. What a powerful message to end on. thanks again, Asma, and hopefully we'll see you again on the Ambassador Talks. Thanks to you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.